You wake before dawn. The Pacific's still waters stretch like black glass, mirroring a sky bruised with moonlight and the last fading stars. The air is heavy, quiet to quiet, off to port. A lone carrier drifts beneath the night. It's massive, deck dark and tense. Not a soul stirs, until suddenly, engines scream to life. 14 bombers growl like awakened beasts, their wings shuddering as they crawl forward into the unknown. If you crave true tales of daring and payback, not legends, but the kind of stories etched in fuel and fire, subscribe now. Ring the bell and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because tonight, we ride with Jimmy Doolittle into the skies over Tokyo. This isn't fantasy. It's history at full throttle. No fluff. Just raw courage and calculated revenge. A date which will live in infamy on December 7th, 1941. The quiet of a Sunday morning was shattered. Japanese Zero fighters screamed over Pearl Harbor like a swarm of hornets in less than 2 hours. Steel giants burned in the harbor. Battleships that had once ruled the Pacific lay torn and twisted. Airfields, proud symbols of American power, were reduced to ruin. 2,400 Americans never got up again. The USS Arizona, a Kaiser-class battleship, vanished in a thunderous fireball. Her decks cracked open, her smokestack crumbled like a dying giant, vanishing beneath waves black with smoke and flame. That afternoon, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress. His hands gripped the podium. His face, carved in sorrow and fury. The chamber was silent, every breath held. His voice, steady yet heavy, spoke the words that would echo through history. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. And with those words, America changed. Across the Pacific, morale plummeted. Hope thinned into silence. The mighty American carrier's Enterprise, Lexington, Saratoga moved through the ocean like ghosts, shadowing Japanese fleets but unable to strike. They were hunters, but with empty claws. In the Philippines, B-17 bombers crouched beneath sunburnt hangars, engines silent, wings coated in dust, waiting for orders that never came. Confusion hung like humidity. There was no response, only waiting. South of the equator, Australia trembled. Word of Japanese troops advancing through island chains sparked fear the continent had not known. In generations, the Pacific, once blue and vast, had turned red and closing. The need for a bold strike by January 1942. The maps in every war room told a grim story. Japan's southern operation had swept across the Pacific like a tide. Guam was gone. Wake Island had fallen. The approaches to Australia and even India now bore the rising sun. Each map stretched Japan's reach farther from the icy Kurils to the jungles of New Guinea, and every red mark burned with humiliation. In Washington, the pressure was suffocating. Admiral Ernest King urged caution. He saw the facts: just 3 American carriers left to challenge a dozen Japanese, risking. One could mean disaster. The Pacific was thin ice, and every decision threatened to plunge. But within the War Department, a different hunger stood. It was not just about strategy. It was about pride, about honor, about sending a message across oceans. You are not untouchable. Morale needed air. America needed vengeance. The Allies needed proof that Japan could bleed. Then General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, rose with an idea that felt more like a gamble than a plan. Something reckless. Something impossible. Launch medium bombers directly at Tokyo from a carrier. A silence followed. Then laughter, scoffs, dismissals. Everyone knew carriers were for fighters, for dive bombers, not for lumbering, twin-engine machines. A bomber on a flight deck was a fantasy or a death wish. But Arnold wasn't imagining a failure. He was seeing a spark. If Doolittle's men could do the unthinkable, if they could fly over Japan, strike at its heart, and make it home even. If only some made it home it would rattle the empire to its core. It would avenge Pearl Harbor not with words, but with fire. It would remind the world America was still coming. Enter Jimmy Doolittle. James Harold Jimmy Doolittle was no ordinary pilot. He was a man shaped by sky and steel, daring and discipline, a West Point graduate turned barnstormer. He didn't just fly, he broke boundaries. In 1922, he blazed across the country in a single engine, setting a transcontinental speed record. By 1942, he had already become legend at Moffett Field. He taught instrument flying with the calm intensity of someone who had seen storms and flown through them. To those who served beside him, Doolittle was more than skilled. He was composed under pressure, the rare man who could combine the boldness of civilian ingenuity with the crisp exactness of military command. He made chaos seem manageable, predictable, beatably human. So when General Hap Arnold offered him command of the most audacious air raid in American history, Doolittle didn't blink. He didn't ask if it could be done. He asked how soon. In a dim briefing room at Bowling Field, he leaned over maps of Tokyo's industrial zones. His finger traced oil refineries, power plants, munitions depots. He wasn't just looking to strike, he was looking to cripple. He envisioned the impossible, a low-level strike with bombers skimming rooftops at 200 feet, dodging radar, hitting targets with surgical precision. His staff raised concerns. Japanese picket boats could see them coming over. 1,000 miles out at sea, Doolittle looked up, steady as ever. His answer was simple, quiet, resolute. If we're detected, we carry on. We'll have to Project Camel. Secret of the B-25s. The B-25 Mitchell wasn't made for this mission. It was built for solid ground, not the narrow, rolling deck of a carrier. It had twin engines, twin tails, and a frame that didn't belong on water. But that didn't matter. It was the only bomber light enough to take off from a carrier and strong enough to deliver real damage. To make it work, every detail had to change. Every part had to be questioned. Fuel expansion. The first step was survival. Bombers needed to stretch their reach far beyond design. Extra tanks were wedged into every empty space inside the bomb bay, beneath the fuselage, transforming the range from 1,300 to 2,400 miles, enough to reach Tokyo and, with luck, crash land somewhere in China. Bomb rack changes. The B-25's nose bay was too tight to launch properly from a carrier. Pilots adapted, learning how to slip their 500-pound payloads through a specially cut rear trapdoor. It wasn't elegant, but war rarely is. Weight reduction. Every pound mattered. They tore out gun turrets, ripped off armor plating, and tossed unnecessary radios. Some crews even ditched their parachutes. What was left was a lean, ghostly machine. Crews dubbed them Green Hornets, sleek, strange, and deadly. At Eglin Field in Florida, under the secret code name Operation Camel, the 16 chosen aircraft numbered 6 through 21 underwent transformation. Mechanics wiped saltwater corrosion from bolts. Deck landing trials played out on mock carriers. The work was relentless. Between greasing wheel bearings and wiping oil from goggles, mechanics tuned the engines with the care of clockmakers. Navigators calibrated their drift meters again and again. preparing to cross a Pacific sky as unpredictable as fate itself. Everyone knew this wasn't just another mission. It was a leap into the dark. 5. Skepticism and resolve. Navy admirals were skeptical. They didn't hide it. One scoffed at Doolittle to his face. "Colonel, your bombers will flop like ducks off our deck." Doolittle didn't flinch. He grinned. Then fired back. "Then they'll fly like ducks, too." The room went silent. No one challenged him after that. Even President Roosevelt expressed concern. He knew that if this mission failed, if American bombers fell into the ocean or were captured without striking a blow at Cal, they'd devastate public morale even more than Pearl Harbor had. But the time for hesitation had passed. By March 1942, the gears of history were turning. Task Force 16, led by the aircraft carriers Hornet and Enterprise, escorted by destroyers, slipped away from San Francisco beneath the fog of secrecy. No radio, no signals, just silence. The ocean swallowed them whole. On the decks, sailors murmured. Rumors. They watched crates marked top secret being loaded, extra fuel drums, unusual bomb casings, and most curious of all, men in flight jackets with no Navy insignia, civilian-looking. But with the gaze of warriors, the whispers began. A strike, a raid, maybe Japan itself. But no one said it out loud. They didn't have to. The silence was thick with purpose. Training, transit, and dawn over Tokyo before dawn had even broken over Florida, before birds stirred or sunlight touched the palms. Colonel Doolittle's crews were already at work, shadows moving under white floodlights at Eglin. Field, the air was thick with oil and anticipation. On a painted runway meant to mimic the Hornet's narrow deck, 14 B-25 Mitchell bombers lined up like silent beasts waiting to leap. Their engines growled in warming rhythm. The mock carrier strip stretched just 300 feet. No room for error. Pilots, jaws tight and hands steady, practiced a ritual that became muscle memory. Brakes held at full power, engine screaming to max RPM. Then release. The wheels surged forward. Each man had to trust that the stripped-down bomber would rise before the concrete ran out. If not, in the real attempt, it would mean water, fire, and death. Ground crews stood with measuring sticks and stopwatches, recording every takeoff to the inch. If a Mitchell didn't lift by 700 feet, it wouldn't clear the Hornet's deck. Every inch was the difference between flight and failure. In nearby hangars, navigators pored over maps, tracing dead-reckoning courses across chalkboard oceans. They trained over flatlands that mimicked the Pacific's relentless sameness. No landmarks, no margin for doubt. Radio operators drilled in sealed silence, no transmissions, no chatter, just memorized code phrases, rehearsed like prayers. Every man on board knew what the plan demanded. Launch at first light. Strike Tokyo. Escape into the unknown skies of China. And if anything went wrong, they knew the ocean waited. Steaming into the unknown on April 8, 1942, Task Force 16 slipped quietly out of San Francisco Bay. There were no trumpets, no headlines, just steel hulls cutting through dark water beneath a veil of strict radio silence. The aircraft carriers Hornet and Enterprise moved as one, flanked by destroyers slicing the swells like knives. Beneath decks, the engines hummed. With purpose, above, the sky turned from night to pale indigo. Sailors spoke only in whispers. Rumors floated like steam off the sea. Extra fuel drums, mysterious bomb crates, and civilian-clad airmen boarding the Hornet. No one asked questions. No one needed answers. They all felt it. Something enormous was in motion. Waves slapped. The hulls with chilling rhythm, as if rehearsed, as if choreographed by war itself. No splashes broke discipline. No signals pierced the silence. Every heartbeat moved to the tempo of secrecy. As the fleet turned west into the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Warm breezes began to carry strange scent citrus from the coast, salt, from the sea, and something else, the faint electric smell of approaching fate. Below decks, tension crackled like static in a radio far from home. Navigators hunched over charts in red-lit compartments, tracing a thin arc 600 miles due, east of Tokyo. That was the limit, the edge of invisibility. Any closer and the Japanese picket boats would see them. Any farther, and the bombers wouldn't have enough fuel to reach China. Every mile mattered. Every second ticked like thunder. On the bridge of the Hornet, Captain Mark Mitchell paced in a dark suit and goggles, scanning the horizon through night vision binoculars. He said little. He simply watched. Aboard the Enterprise, Admiral William Ball Halsey, battle-hardened and grim refuse even a whisper over radio. Orders were scribbled in pencil on worn notepads, handed to runners who dashed in silence. No commands echoed down corridors, just quiet steps and eyes that didn't blink. This was no ordinary voyage. This was the edge of risk. This was the moment before history changes its course. April 18th, 5:30 hours. Let them roll at 05:00 hours, inside a hushed briefing room aboard the Hornet. Colonel Doolittle's final words cut through the silence like steel. No turning back. Once you're off this deck, it's you and your crew against the odds. It was a line every man carried with him to the edge of the Pacific sky. Pilots tightened their helmets with gloved hands that shook just slightly. Gunners clicked their safety harnesses in place with the discipline of soldiers hiding. Bombardiers leaned into their bays, setting fuses to safe with trembling fingers, knowing they'd go live only seconds before striking the heart of Tokyo on deck. Two Navy crews in wetsuits trimmed the resting cables from the bow and aft catapults. The Hornet's hull vibrated underfoot as diesel engines murmured, low and heavy. A chill wind scraped across the flight deck. One by one, 14 B-25s taxied into position. Their engines roared, howled, trembled against the rising morning. The -1, number 6 through number 21, lined up like steel predators into tight rows. Every man inside knew the margin for error was measured in feet. At precisely 0530. Doolittle gave the all-clear. No ceremony, no salute, just resolve. His plane, number 16, surged forward. The deck blurred beneath it as the left wheels passed the island. Superstructure. LT. Ted Lawson released the brakes. The wind screamed past his cockpit. The bomber lunged forward, climbing over the sea like a bullet launched from a slingshot. Wheels tucked, engines roared, the sky opened. Behind him, the Team Mitchell followed, one by one. In rhythmic thunder. From the bridge, Captain Mitchell stood in silence. He watched the final bomber vanish into the distance, then turned. The Hornet wheeled sharply away at flank speed, vanishing into shadow before the searchlights could find her. Low level over water and land, this had never been done. Never in history had bombers launched from a carrier deck, let alone headed straight for the capital of an enemy empire. Now, at just 200 feet above the glistening water, 14 B-25s fanned out in a disciplined formation. The team planes in a staggered line. Doolittle led from the front. The sky was silent. Radar remained dark. No chatter. No warning. Beneath them, the Pacific gleamed like cold gunmetal. Each plane flew low, hugging the surface to avoid enemy detection. A single enemy patrol boat could end it. One glare of a searchlight could bring walls of flak crashing down from the sky dot in every cockpit. Doolittle's voice crackled over the intercom. Stick together. Keep low, eyes peeled for pickets. 400 miles to China, 600 to Tokyo. And every minute, the horizon crept closer as dawn broke. A pale pink glow bloomed across the sky. The ocean shimmered like molten glass. The green hornets, stripped down and sleek, began their slow climb toward land. Back aboard Enterprise crews lined the rails, binoculars in hand, breath caught in their chests. They watched the black dots move east. No alarms, no pursuit. The bombers were going to reach Japan undetected. Tokyo's waking terror at 09 for 5 hours local time. The skyline of Tokyo appeared ahead, so familiar from maps, now real beneath the wings. The first bombers broke formation from 1,500 feet. They dove into strafing runs over docks and smokestacks. Machine gunfire traced fiery lines through the air. Civilians scattered in confusion, staring skyward in pajamas and slippers. Then, they climbed to 2,000 feet. The bombing runs began. They targeted the Mitsubishi engine plant, the Nakajima Aircraft Works, factories that fed Japan's war machine. Bombs fell in rhythmic thunder. Smoke geysered upward from rooftops. Windows shattered. Fires bloomed across the industrial sprawl. Clay tiles burst like shells. Tokyo had never known this kind of fear. Anti-aircraft guns scrambled to return fire, but at the bombers' low altitude. Most of the flak burst too close to the ground, exploding near rooftops, killing civilians, missing. Their marks. LT, Ted Lawson, peering from his cockpit, later described the moment like a dream. The reflection of the burning city danced on the glassy bay below. His stunned voice rang from a radio broadcast. Gear and thunder in the sky, American planes above Tokyo. The long run to China, the bombs had fallen. The target struck. But survival was not guaranteed. The Mitchells turned south, leaving smoke and chalk behind. Fuel gauges flickered into the danger zone. Originally, Doolittle's plan allowed for a launch 500 miles from Japan, giving enough cushion to reach friendly airstrips in China, Chacho, Hankou, Nanchang. But 4 hours before schedule, a Japanese picket boat had spotted the task force. The Hornet launched early from 650 miles out. The safety margin was gone. Now, every bomber faced the same crisis. Navigators recalculated. Charts were updated in trembling hands. 300 miles to Chachu, 400 to Hankou. 30-minute glide over mountains if necessary. Pilots joked over intercoms, voices tight with exhaustion. Hope we find someone to flag down over Zhejiang province. Villagers working in rice fields looked up. They saw stars and stripes painted. On undoing tanks, surprise turned to. The word spread through telegraph lines and shouted warnings. American bombers overhead, heads down. Desperate landings and the courage of strangers by mid-afternoon. The mission became a desperate gamble for survival. The first B-25s began descending through a low mist, engine sputtering. Lawson's number 16 iced over in the final approach. He crash-landed in a muddy rice paddy. The gear shredding in soft earth. The plane flipped. Wood splintered. Metal screamed. It came to rest just feet from a thatched hut. Lawson and his crew climbed out bloodied, shaken, alive. Others weren't. As lucky, one plane crashed into a hillside, trapping the crew inside until local farmers tore open the fuselage with bare hands. Another ditched in a march, its crew wading ashore soaked, half-conscious and shaking. But across the countryside, they were not alone. Thousands of Chinese civilians rose to help. Women hid airmen in haystacks and fed them warm rice. Monks tended to wounds with scraps of linen. Farmers led them by moonlight to guerrilla camps. They did so knowing the price. Japan's retaliation would be ruthless. The three alls policy: kill all, burn all. Loot all was now in motion. The price of revenge within. Days, the earth itself cried out. Villages that had aided airmen were burned to ash. Civilians were rounded up, tortured, executed. Entire families vanished. Entire towns were erased. Historians estimate up to 250,000 Chinese civilians were murdered in retaliation for their courage. American airmen paid as well. 8 were captured, 3 were executed. 1 died in prison, the remaining 4 endured years of captivity, beaten, starved, and forgotten until war's end brought their liberation. And yet, despite the cost, something had changed. In the United States, the headline screamed with catharsis: Tokyo bombed. Newspapers sold out in hours. War bond sales surged. Enlistment lines stretched down city blocks. The despair after Pearl Harbor cracked open and something brighter poured through. President Roosevelt called the raid a magnificent feat, and for a nation that had needed hope badly, desperately, this strike across the sea wasn't just revenge. It was the first spark in a fire that would one day consume the empire that struck first. Fates of the raiders: no sooner had the last B-25 vanished into the cloudy skies over China than the real trial began. The mission wasn't over. It had only shifted shape from fire and steel over Tokyo to hunger, pain, and isolation in the rice fields and bamboo groves of Zhejiang. The 14 crews were now scattered across a vast and unfamiliar land. Some crash-landed in remote paddies. Others bailed out into pitch-black forests. All of them were exhausted. All of them were hunted. Crash landings: LT. Ted Lawson's bomber plane number 16 tore through low cloud cover before cartwheeling into a muddy field. Its nose buried itself waist-deep in the soft earth. The impact crushed the undercarriage. Lawson, bleeding and disoriented, dragged himself free with shattered teeth and broken bones. His crew crawled out behind him, stunned and limping. They didn't speak. They couldn't. Then, out of the mist, came voices. Not Japanese, not English. Local villagers, startled, barefoot, armed with nothing but bravery, helped carry the broken men to a hidden farmhouse, far from patrol roads, where silence became sanctuary. Miraculous rescues in a mist-shrouded valley. 2 crews waited in terror. No food, no map. Rain soaked their uniforms, insects bit through their skin. Then, at dawn, they heard it, the rhythmic tap of wood and clogs on damp stone. Chinese guerrillas appeared from the thickets like ghosts. Faces weathered, eyes fierce. They said nothing, just motioned, followed. And so they did over hills, across rivers, for days without rest. The airmen limped behind their guides along ancient footpaths, moving toward freedom with blistered feet and hearts pounding from more than just exhaustion. Some of those trails had existed for centuries. That week, they became lifelines. Captured heroes, not every man escaped. 8 of the raiders were caught by the Camp 8I, the Japanese secret police, dragged from hiding places during brutal midnight raid. These, beaten, starved, interrogated. 3 were executed by firing squad. 2 died slowly, wasting away in forced labor camps, their names unknown to their jailers. The remaining 3 survived barely for long years of hell, behind barbed wire, under winter frost and summer rot. They refused to break. 1 carved the date of each day into a wooden beam, keeping time by memory and faith. Another half-mad. Whispered crew names like a prayer. When asked in prison why, they dropped bombs on Tokyo. LT. Robert Hite gave no speech. Just a quiet truth. We did what we were ordered to do. We struck at their heart, not their souls. He said it without pride. Just honesty. Chinese suffering under reprisals for America. The raid lit a fire of hope. For China, it summoned a storm of blood. The Japanese military, humiliated by the bombing of their capital, responded with fury, not against soldiers, against the people who had shown mercy. They called it the 3-all policy: kill all, burn all, loot all. And they meant every word. Massive destruction. Villages from Chachu to Hanko vanished under clouds of black smoke. Homes crumbled. Granaries exploded in orange flames. Temples some centuries old were torn down stone by stone. Whole districts glowed red at night as fire consumed what peace remained. Civilians fled with only what they could carry: a bundle of rice, a child, a single cooking pot. Sometimes nothing at all. In some places, even the trees seemed to burn. Civilians executed. The terror was surgical. Entire families were rounded up. Fathers were marched into rows and shot 1 bullet each. Mothers were beaten for answers they didn't have. Children watched it all. Some were taken. Others were left behind, crying in the ashes. Eyewitnesses said it wasn't war. It was punishment. It's believed that up to 250,000 Chinese men, women, and children lost their lives not for fighting, but for helping. And yet, even in the face of that cruelty, compassion never vanished. Enduring courage. Mothers still fed the injured. Monks still bandaged strangers. Farmers still risked their lives guiding airmen to safety under moonlight. They whispered prayers in dialects the Americans couldn't understand. But the message was always the same: you are not alone. In the dead of night, some hid allied airmen in dry cellars behind false walls. Others led them into mountain caves wrapped in silence. When bombs fell again, some villagers chose to stay with the wounded rather than save themselves. In the flickering glow of lanterns, stories were told. Tales of American ghosts, sky warriors who had fallen from the clouds to strike at the empire. To the children, they were heroes. To the elders, omens. To the Japanese, targets. But to those who helped them, the airmen were proof that someone across the ocean still cared. Proof that resistance was possible. Proof that one act of kindness, even in the shadow of death, still mattered. Tokyo's shock and Japanese morale. Back in Tokyo, the raid shattered more than glass and steel. It shattered the illusion of safety for years. Japan had fought its war across distant seas and foreign jungles, but on that spring morning, the war came home. Newspapers scrambled to print grainy sketches of unfamiliar silhouettes. American B-25 bombers, black against the rising sun over Mount Fuji. The paper ink hadn't even dried before fear began to take root. Imperial fury inside Emperor Hirohito's court. Silence fell as ministers absorbed the news. Then came the rage. Emergency sessions were called beneath banners of the chrysanthemum throne. Generals slammed fists into polished tables. The attack was called a grave insult to the honor of the empire. In quiet panic, engineers were ordered to dig air raid shelters beneath shrines. Palaces, even theaters. The Japanese elite, once untouchable, now rehearsed how to hide. Public panic on the streets. It was worse. Factory workers dropped tools and fled. Mothers clutched children at crosswalks, scanning the skies. Smoke still hung over Tokyo Bay as merchant captains halted their routes, unwilling to risk another thunderstrike from the clouds. Whispers filled train cars and barber shops. If they reached Tokyo, they can reach anywhere. Propaganda. Pivot. The government tried to spin it. New posters showed smiling soldiers, fists raised in vengeance. Radio hosts growled that the Americans would pay tenfold. But the mask slipped in private, in diaries tucked under futons and behind scrolls. Citizens wrote their truth. Our skies are open. Our emperor is afraid. This wasn't just a strike, it was a fracture, a ripple through the military's confidence, a crack in the steel wall of national pride. It would take months to repair. American morale in the home front meanwhile. Across the Pacific, the mood flipped like a switch. After months of grief and doubt, the United States awoke to headlines that didn't speak of loss but of revenge. It was the first real blow struck back, and the country felt it like electricity. Headline victory newspapers didn't just report it, they celebrated it. Doolittle Raiders bombed Tokyo, screamed in ink across every breakfast table in America. Photos of Tokyo's streets appended, blackened sat beside portraits of the raiders for towns that had lost sons at Pearl Harbor. It felt like justice. It felt like standing again. Fund drives and enlistments across the nation. War bond drives exploded. On busy corners, children waved flags while mothers dropped spare coins into liberty jars. Farmers mailed earnings. School teachers gave half their paychecks. Recruitment officers filled with eager young men, lining up shoulder to shoulder, their eyes burning with purpose. One boy in Nebraska signed his enlistment with a note, "For Doolittle, from my uncle at Pearl. Leadership praise in the White House. President Roosevelt called the raid." A magnificent feat. He wrote to Doolittle personally, "You have lifted the cloud of defeat. You've given us the will to win again." That spirit echoed through Doolittle's Medal of Honor citation, by daring and skill. They avenged our dead, struck at the enemy's soul, and rekindled America's fighting spirit. Candles in the dark in the towns that birthed the raiders in Ohio. In Texas, in California, families lit candles at windowsills, not just for a victory, but for the men still out there, drifting in enemy lands, with nothing but fading map sand. Worn boots, those candles weren't decorations. They were promises that America would not forget them, that their names would be remembered, not just in medals or memorials, but in the very breath of the country they defended. They had flown into fire so that others might feel hope again. And across the ocean, Tokyo smoldered not just from flame, but from the revelation that the storm could come from any direction. Strategic impact and enduring legacy of shockwaves from the Doolittle Raid didn't fade with the smoke. They rippled outward through war councils, across battle maps, into the very bones of future strategy. It was more than a military operation. It was a wake-up call to every general, every sailor, every leader clinging to old assumptions, Japan's strategic pivot for the Japanese high command. It wasn't the bombs that hit hardest, it was the humiliation. They had believed the home islands untouchable, protected by thousands of miles of open ocean. The raid tore that illusion apart. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor, saw what others didn't want to admit: if Tokyo wasn't safe, Japan's war could not be fought the same way. He demanded a response not just symbolic, but overwhelming. A knockout punch to America's Pacific Fleet. And so, Midway was born. The Battle of Midway, June 4th to 7th, 1942, was shaped by the urgency stirred by Doolittle's strike. U.S. cryptographers, already hard at work breaking Japanese codes, now had direction and time. Admiral Chester Nimitz set the trap. Yamamoto walked right into it, full of Japan's proudest carriers Akogi, Kago, Sraiu, and here you were destroyed in a single blow. The tide of war turned on the open sea. And it all began with those 14 bombers roaring out of the morning. Missed weeks earlier, island hopping and the road to Tokyo Midway shifted momentum. And with that momentum, a new plan emerged, not to charge straight at Tokyo, but to island hop. One blood-soaked step at a time. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each name a scar, each victory a sacrifice, and behind every Marine storming a beach, behind every sailor on watch at night, was the memory of April 1940 to the belief that Japan's homeland was not beyond reach. By 1945. The skies over Japan were filled with the deep thunder of B-29 superfortresses. They didn't fly at low altitude. They didn't need a carrier deck. But they followed the path the Doolittle Raiders had carved in fire. The war's end began not with mushroom clouds, but with those 14 streaks across the sunrise. Necessity, not vengeance. Doolittle's reflections. Jimmy Doolittle never boasted, even as history placed medals on his chest and books in his name. He shrugged off glory. He spoke plainly in interviews. We didn't do it for payback. We did it because it had to be done. To him, the raid wasn't about a mission. It was about strategy, about showing the world, especially the American people, that the fight wasn't over. But historians know better. They've seen the trembling letters written by crewmen the night before takeoff. They've studied the photographs of airmen embracing before boarding. They've read Doolittle's own quiet journal entries, written when the medals were locked away and the cameras were gone. There was vengeance. Not loud, not bitter, just burning, quiet, cold. The kind of vengeance that rebuilds a nation's courage. Cultural memory and commemoration wholly wasted no time. By 1944, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo hit theaters, telling L.T. Ted Lawson's story. With drama and reverence, America watched breathlessly as actors reenacted the impossible launch, the bombs falling, the crashes in rice paddies. For many, it was the first time they saw what courage really looked like. But monuments didn't stop at the movies. In Oklahoma City, a bronze statue stands tall. Doolittle, forever in flight beside a silent Mitchell. In Hanyang, China, the people who had sheltered the raiders built their own memorial, not just to honor the airmen, but to remember the thousands of Chinese who had died protecting them every April 18th. At Arlington National Cemetery, a small crowd gathers. Not politicians, not film crews, just families, grandchildren, veterans, quiet voices. A wreath is placed. A salute is held, and in that silence, history breathes again. They remember the courage it took to launch, the agony it left behind, the fire that changed everything. True revenge and the dawn of victory. Revenge often burns hot, wild, reckless, consuming. But this was different. This was the kind of revenge that changed wars. The Doolittle Raid didn't end Japan's ambitions. In one strike, it didn't destroy factories or armies in great numbers, but it rearranged the entire war map. It peeled back the curtain of fear in America, and it forced Japan's war machine into decisions it couldn't take back. 14 bombers, 79 airmen, one dawn raid. That cold, calculated vengeance set off a chain reaction that ended in surrender ceremonies aboard the USS Mother. Just over 3 years later. As our 4-part story closes, picture it once more. The roar of engines on a narrow, shaking deck, the scent of sea spray and oil, the silence of a crew waiting to die or do the impossible, the first wheel lifting into the air. They weren't sure they'd make it, but they knew they had to try. And for that reason, We remember. Thank you for walking this journey through time with us. If this story stirred your heart or brought the past to life, please subscribe and let us know where you're listening from. What tale should we tell next? Until then, sleep well. And may history's echoes carry you gently into dreams.